Airports are places where appearances deceive, and assumptions can change the course of lives in seconds. Imagine being moments away from taking off on a flight, only to witness a shocking scene unfold, where a respected black pilot dressed in uniform was humiliated and kicked out of a first-class cabin. The reason? A flight attendant didn't believe he belonged there. What she didn't know was that this pilot wasn't just an employee. He was the owner of the entire airline. What happened next shook everyone on that flight and taught a lesson that the world should never forget. It was a crisp autumn morning at one of the busiest airports in the country. Passengers hurried through the terminal, clutching boarding passes, dragging luggage, and searching for their gates. Among them was a tall black man in his 40s, moving calmly but confidently. His uniform was perfectly pressed, his cap tucked under his arm, and his shoes polished so clean they reflected the glossy airport floor. His name was Marcus Johnson. To the world, Marcus was just another pilot. Few people knew the truth. Marcus wasn't just flying for the airline, he owned it. After years of discrimination in the aviation industry, being doubted, overlooked, and told he didn't look like a pilot, Marcus had built his own airline from the ground up. It was his way of breaking barriers, of proving that talent and leadership didn't come with a color. But Marcus never flaunted his position. He preferred to walk among his employees, blending in, ensuring he saw how things really worked on a daily basis. To him, leadership meant understanding every angle, from the pilot's seat to the flight attendant's cabin. On this day, Marcus decided to board one of his flights quietly, choosing to ride along and observe. He had no plans to reveal himself as the airline's owner. But fate had something else in store. As he approached the gate and entered the plane, a storm was already brewing, one that would expose how deep prejudice still ran, even in places where professionalism was supposed to rule above all. Marcus walked down the jet bridge and stepped onto the plane. The energy was typical of a morning flight. Passengers settling in, business travelers pulling out laptops, parents wrangling restless kids. The flight crew greeted passengers with polite smiles. Marcus offered a nod, and as a uniformed pilot, he barely drew attention from most. He made his way to the first-class cabin, placed his bag in the overhead bin, and settled into a seat near the window. But the peace lasted only moments. A young flight attendant approached, her expression tight. She glanced at Marcus, then at his seat. "Excuse me, sir," she said with a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "This section is reserved for passengers. The crew sits in the jump seats. You'll need to move." Marcus looked at her calmly. He didn't argue, didn't flash any authority. "I'm fine here," he said simply. Her smile stiffened. She leaned in, lowering her voice. "Sir, I don't know how you got into this seat, but this isn't for crew members sneaking upgrades. Please move before boarding is complete." Marcus still didn't react with anger. He stayed composed, even though passengers nearby were starting to notice. A murmur spread across the cabin, some people frowning in confusion, others whispering. The attendant's voice grew sharper. "I need you to step out. You don't belong here." The humiliation cut deeper than she could imagine. Marcus had spent his life proving he belonged in places where others tried to push him out. But rather than defend himself immediately, he observed. Watched how she stood taller when challenging him, how she assumed superiority without asking a single question. Finally, she flagged down another crew member. "We have an issue," she said loudly enough for passengers to hear. The implication was clear. Marcus wasn't supposed to be there. That was when things escalated. The second attendant whispered to her, eyes widening slightly as if realizing he might actually be a pilot. But the first one brushed it off. "He probably borrowed the uniform," she muttered dismissively. Passengers gasped. A few defended Marcus, saying, "He looks like a real pilot," while others, influenced by her tone, frowned suspiciously. The weight of judgment filled the cabin. It was a public trial without evidence, just skin color and assumption. Security was called to the plane. Within minutes, 2 officers stepped in, demanding Marcus step into the aisle. He complied, not wanting to escalate the situation. Cameras came out, passengers recording every second, sensing something wasn't right. The flight attendant crossed her arms, satisfied she had restored order. She couldn't have been more wrong. Just as Marcus stood in the aisle preparing to say something, the captain of the flight emerged from the cockpit. He stopped short when he saw who was being escorted out. His jaw dropped. "Marcus?" The room froze. The captain's voice carried both recognition and respect. "That's Captain Marcus Johnson." Whispers erupted. Some passengers gasped. Others leaned forward, realizing this wasn't just a random crew member, but the captain wasn't finished. His voice grew firmer, louder. "Not only is he a pilot, he's the owner of this airline." The cabin erupted. The same passengers who had doubted him minutes earlier now looked horrified. The security officers immediately backed off, stepping aside in shame. The smug look on the flight attendant's face melted into shock, her eyes wide, lips trembling. Marcus, still calm, looked around the cabin. He didn't gloat. He didn't lash out. Instead, he let the silence hang heavy. Everyone felt the weight of the moment. The exposure of prejudice laid bare in front of an entire plane load of witnesses. The captain gestured toward Marcus with pride. "Without him, none of us would have these jobs. None of these planes would even be flying." Passengers clapped. Some even stood in respect. The flight attendant's face turned pale as she realized the magnitude of her mistake. Her attempt to strip a man of dignity had backfired so completely that it now threatened her own career. After the chaos settled, Marcus returned to his seat, greeted by nods of respect and murmured apologies from passengers. The flight attendant, shaken and humiliated, tried to retreat quietly, but Marcus stopped her with a glance. He didn't shout or embarrass her further. Instead, he said in a calm, measured tone, "Sometimes the way we treat people reveals more about us than about them." His words hung in the air, heavier than any punishment could be. He knew everyone on that plane, passengers, crew, even the security officers, would carry that line with them long after landing. For Marcus, it wasn't just about personal vindication. It was about exposing a mindset that still infected workplaces and public spaces everywhere. Racism often hides in small assumptions, in the snap judgments made without thought. And sometimes it takes moments like this, painful, public, undeniable, to rip off the mask. By the time the flight landed, Marcus's story was already going viral. Passengers had posted videos online, and within hours, headlines blasted across the internet. Airline owner kicked out of first class on his own flight because he's black. The airline issued a statement, but Marcus didn't call for the attendant's firing. Instead, he insisted on mandatory training for every employee, focusing on unconscious bias, respect, and professionalism. He wanted change, not revenge. In the end, Marcus turned humiliation into transformation. And as the story spread worldwide, it carried with it a piercing question. How many times have we judged someone by the color of their skin, and not by the content of their character? The answer is one we must all confront before the next Marcus walks into a room, only to be told he doesn't belong.